It was a crisp Saturday morning in early spring, the kind that made the entire town of Brookridge come alive. Trees lined the sidewalks, blooming with delicate white flowers. Families strolled through Riverside Park. Children raced across grassy fields, and the scent of fresh-cut grass drifted on the breeze. Among them was the Thompson family, Mark, Jenna, and their bright-eyed 7-year-old daughter, Emily. She wore a pink hoodie with tiny stars and carried her favorite stuffed bear. Buttons, wherever she went. That morning was meant to be peaceful, just like any other. Emily had just climbed onto the swings while her parents set up a picnic. Laughter and the creak of the swing chains filled the air. But the serenity didn't last. A sharp siren cut through the air, growing louder by the second. People looked. Up, some froze. Others turned their heads toward the parking lot behind the nearby gas station. Police cars suddenly appeared from both ends of the street. One screeched to a halt, and a uniformed officer jumped out, shouting commands into his radio. In seconds, more officers arrived, some on foot, one with a German shepherd by his side. Emily had never seen a police dog before. The black and tan shepherd wore a vest with the words K9UNIT Police emblazoned across it. The dog barked twice, deep and sharp, ears pointed forward and body tense. The officer beside him yelled, "Suspect on foot," headed southbound through the park. It felt like a movie, but it was happening right in front of her. She didn't know what robbery meant, or why people were running away instead of toward the flashing lights. All she knew was that the dog's eyes, fierce and focused, weren't scary to her. They were protective. In the middle of the confusion, Emily stepped off her swing and clutched buttons tightly. She felt her knees tremble. Her mother shouted her name, running toward her. But Emily's eyes were fixed on something else. From behind a hedge, near the walking trail, a man emerged wearing a green jacket and black cap. He was limping, one leg dragging. His eyes darted around wildly, sweat pouring down his face. For a brief second, he stopped. His eyes locked with Emily's. Something cold passed between them. He didn't say a word, but the scar across his cheek twitched slightly as he turned and bolted. Emily's lips parted to call out, but her voice wouldn't come. Her heart thudded in her chest, loud as the sirens. She backed away slowly and pointed, but no one was looking at her. Everyone's attention was focused on the barking police dog, who was already pulling forward, sniffing the air. A handler shouted, "Kane, track," and the dog lunged forward with laser focus, heading in the exact direction the man had. Run. In that frozen moment, Emily didn't feel fear. Not exactly. It was more like confusion, tightly wrapped in a blanket of silence. Her parents grabbed her, pulled her close, and hurried her toward the edge of the crowd. People whispered around them. Did someone get shot? Was it a bank? They say the guy's armed. Emily didn't speak a word. She simply kept staring back at the place where the man had been, and where the dog had disappeared after him. Over the next hour, officers canvassed the area, questioned witnesses, and finally apprehended a suspect 2 blocks away. They found a handgun tossed behind a dumpster and cash stuffed inside the man's jacket. He was bleeding slightly, having scraped his leg while jumping a fence. One of the detectives commented that it was a miracle no one got hurt, especially with so many families in the park. But the real miracle, though no one knew it yet, was standing quietly beside a picnic blanket, clutching a worn stuffed bear, and staring into the distance. Emily had seen everything, every detail, and deep inside, it had left a mark. That evening, after dinner, Emily didn't touch her food. Her father knelt beside her and asked gently, "Sweetheart, are you okay? You are really brave today." She nodded slowly, but said nothing. He tried again. Did you see something scary? Another nod. Do you want to talk about it? Silence. Her mother stroked her hair and said softly, You don't have to say anything until you're ready, baby. Emily stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the street below. She wasn't sure what she felt. Fear? Maybe. But more than that, she was stuck like her thoughts had words, but they couldn't come out. She kept seeing the man's face, his eyes, the scar. And, oddly enough, the dog Kane. The dog hadn't barked at her. He hadn't scared her. He'd looked at her like he understood something she didn't know how to say. And something about that stuck with her like glue. That night, she didn't sleep much. Her parents checked on her twice. A second time, they found her curled up under her blanket, whispering softly to her bear. She saw him, she whispered. He had a scar. And a green jacket, like moss. Buttons didn't answer. But Kane would have. She just knew it. The next morning in Brookridge felt like the calm after a storm. But inside the Thompson home, tension lingered. Emily sat at the kitchen table, untouched cereal turning soggy in front of her. Her mother, Jenna, quietly sipped coffee while eyeing her daughter with concern. Mark, her father, had barely slept. They had both expected Emily to start talking about what she saw. But she hadn't said a single word since her late night whisper to her stuffed bear. The news reported the robbery on every channel. The suspect, a man named Travis Greeley, had a history of petty theft, but never violence until now. Police believed he was desperate. They were building a case, but the timeline still had gaps. Witnesses offered conflicting stories. No one had seen the direction the suspect took in the park. No one, except Emily. Detectives arrived at the house by mid-morning. Detective Rachel Morales, a calm woman in her 40s with kind eyes, introduced herself. We're just hoping to speak with Emily, if she's comfortable. We believe she might have seen something important. Emily, sitting on the living room couch with her bear, glanced at the officer, then looked down. She hasn't really said anything, Jenna said gently. We don't want to pressure her. Detective Morales crouched near Emily and smiled. Hi, sweetheart. I have a little girl about your age. She's scared of thunderstorms. You know what helps her? Talking to her cat. Animals are really good at listening. Emily looked up, just slightly. Morales smiled again. Do you like animals? Emily gave the smallest of nods. You know Officer Kane, right? The police dog at the park? He's a good boy. You are really brave out there. Still no words. Morales gave the parents a business card and left with a warm, no rush. Just let us know if she wants to talk. Later that day, Jenna had an idea. Emily, she said softly, would you like to see Kane again? The reaction was instant. Emily's eyes lit up. She nodded without hesitation. So the following day, they drove to the police canine training center where Kane was stationed. The moment Emily stepped out of the car, her nervous fidgeting stopped. Kane was already waiting, tail wagging, beside his handler officer Jake Harmon. She's our quiet witness, huh? Jake said, smiling warmly. Kane trotted forward and gently sniffed Emily's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she dropped to her knees and hugged him. It was the first time she'd smiled since the incident. Then, to everyone's shock, Emily leaned in and whispered into Kane's ear. It was too soft to hear, but Jake knelt down. Hey, can you say that again? Or maybe show me. Emily pointed to the dog's vest. She told him, she whispered. Jake blinked. What did she tell him, sweetie? Emily looked at Kane, then turned back to Jake. He had a scar on his cheek, like this. She traced a line down her face. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Emily continued. And a green jacket, and his shoe was broken, the left one. Jake stared at her, stunned. You saw that? Emily nodded slowly. He looked at me, but Kane saw him too. The information left the adults speechless. None of those details had been released publicly, yet Emily knew them, every one. The scar, the green jacket, the damaged shoe. It was the break the detectives didn't expect from a little girl who hadn't said a word to a single adult. Jake immediately contacted Morales, who returned with a recorder and a child psychologist. They didn't push Emily, but asked if she wanted to talk to Kane again. She did, and she did it willingly. Sitting beside Kane on the floor of the training center, Emily described everything, through whispers and gestures. With Kane at her side, she pieced together the timeline of the suspect's escape. She described where he entered the hedge line, the color of his gloves, and the way he limped on his right side. All of it matched perfectly with the suspect's condition at arrest. She's not just a witness, Morales told Jake later. She's the key. But Emily still refused to speak directly to any adults. She only communicated through Kane. The psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Harper, explained it best. Emily's trauma locked her voice inside. But Kane doesn't ask questions. He doesn't stare. He just listens. That bond is what's helping her. We need to keep Kane close. Emily's parents, overwhelmed but hopeful, agreed. As the case moved forward, Morales and Harper reviewed the tapes of Emily's time with Kane. They built a solid timeline using her testimony. The DA's office, skeptical at first, grew more confident with each verified detail. Still, there was a problem. She won't talk in court, the DA said during a strategy meeting. Not unless Kane is next to her. Morales looked the attorney straight in the eye. Then get her and the dog on that stand? The judge, initially hesitant, eventually agreed to allow a support canine in court, citing mental health considerations. It was rare, but not without precedent. As long as the dog remained calm and unobtrusive, the testimony would be allowed. Emily would appear in court, but not alone. The night before the trial, Emily sat in bed holding buttons in one hand and Kane's vest patch gifted to her by Officer Harmon in the other. Her mother sat beside her, brushing her hair. "Are you scared?" Jenna asked softly. Emily shook her head. "Because Kane will be there?" Emily nodded. Then she whispered, "I want to help the people." Jenna blinked away tears. "You already. Our baby." Downstairs, Morales, Harmon, and Harper reviewed every detail again. They were betting the entire case on a girl who only spoke to a dog, but they all knew Emily had the truth. And sometimes, the truth didn't need to be shouted. Sometimes, it just needed to be whispered to a friend who listens. The morning of the pre-trial hearing dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. In the passenger seat of her father's car, Emily sat bundled in her pink raincoat, her small hands resting on Kane's back as the dog sat beside her. Officer Jake Harmon had personally ensured Kane would be with her from the moment she left the house to the moment she entered the courtroom. The canine officer wasn't just a support animal today, he was her strength, remember? Jake said as they arrived at the courthouse. "Kane's with you the whole time. Just talk to him like always." Emily nodded silently. She wasn't afraid of the building or the people. She was afraid of being wrong. What if she said something, and they didn't believe her? What if she remembered it all wrong? But then Kane let out a soft, reassuring grunt, as if reading her thoughts. She gave him a tiny smile and patted his fur. Inside the courthouse, everyone noticed the girl and her dog. Reporters outside snapped photos, though officers did their best to shield her. A few legal aides whispered in confusion, "Is that the child witness? They're bringing a dog inside?" Detective Morales, standing near the courtroom doors, met the family with a warm expression. "Hey there, Emily. Good to see you again." Emily offered a small wave, and then looked back to Kane in a room just outside the courtroom. The child psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Harper, sat with Emily to go over what would happen. Instead of speaking to the adults, Emily kept whispering into Kane's ear. Then she would nod, and Harper would write down what she meant. It was a strange process, but it worked. Emily says she remembers the man had a red thread hanging from his jacket pocket. Harper translated. She said it stood out because it was blowing in the wind. Morales's eyebrows rose. She flipped through her notebook. There was a red thread found on the fence he jumped. Emily also recalled something no one had even noticed until now, a dull jingle sound when the man ran. Like keys, Harper said. They searched evidence photos and found that the suspect had keys on a chain in his jacket during arrest. Keys no other witness had reported. Emily's memory was not only clear, it was becoming sharper as she repeated it through Kane. Everyone in the room was struck by it. It wasn't just that she had seen the man. It was that, somehow, her trauma had made her memory exact, hyper-focused, precise. Like her brain had recorded a video, she was now replaying scene by scene. As they prepped her for the courtroom, the district attorney entered. A tall, stern man named Gerald Burke. He had initially dismissed the idea of a child witness who only spoke to a dog. Now, watching Emily and Kane interact, his skepticism faded. "She won't answer me," he said. "Try addressing Kane, Harper," suggested. He blinked, then leaned down and said, "Kane, can you ask your friend where the man went after the bushes?" Emily looked at the dog, then pointed across the room. "He limped that way, toward the parking lot." That exact route had matched Kane's own tracking path on the day of the arrest. Burke straightened, visibly impressed. "All right. If she can do this on the stand, we've got a real shot." A few hours later, Emily and Kane were led into the courtroom. Gasps echoed softly as the little girl walked past rows of legal professionals, jury members, and media representatives. She didn't look around. She kept one hand on Kane's leash, and the other on her bear, tucked into the crook of her arm. Judge Miriam Carlson, a woman with a no-nonsense reputation, peered over her glasses. She studied the child, then the dog, and then leaned forward. "Is this the support K9? "Yes, Your Honor," said Burke. "This is Kane. He's not just for comfort. He's been instrumental in allowing the witness to communicate critical details." Carlson nodded. "Very well. Let the dog stay." Emily sat in the witness chair beside Kane, who calmly lay at her feet. The court bailiff asked her to state her name. She whispered it into Kane's ear. Dr. Harper stood, translated, and the judge accepted it. Then the questions began. At first, they were simple. Where she was that day, who she was with, what she saw. Every question went through Kane. Emily would speak to the dog. Harper would listen, and then relay the response. Then came the moment that changed everything. "Emily," Burke asked softly, "do you remember the man's face?" Emily leaned down, her mouth near Kane's ear. Her lips moved slowly, her hand trembling slightly. Harper translated. "She says he had a scar on the left cheek, slanted down. She saw it when he looked at her." Burke pointed at the defendant. "Do you see that man in this courtroom?" Emily looked up briefly, then leaned back to Kane and nodded. Harper translated again. "That's him." The courtroom murmured. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. The child is not directly responding to the questions." Judge Carlson raised her hand. "I've reviewed this situation thoroughly. Counselor, the child is traumatized and under medical care. The method of communication has proven reliable." Objection overruled. The defense lawyer, now frustrated, tried to catch Emily in contradictions. "How do we know she isn't being led?" "She's not being led," Harper answered firmly. "No one in this room has fed her any information. She's giving us new details we're verifying. Then Emily whispered again. Harper paused, eyes wide. She says he had 2 different shoes, one with a broken sole. The courtroom fell silent again. The defendant squirmed in his chair. Burke leaned over to his assistant and whispered, "Check the evidence logs." Seconds later, a file was handed to him. He held it up. Your Honor, Exhibit 7C. The suspect's left shoe was damaged with a partially detached sole. This was not released to the public. Judge Carlson nodded gravely. Emily Small whispered. Observations were becoming the loudest voice in the courtroom. By the end of her testimony, jurors leaned forward, some misty-eyed, others visibly moved. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even raised her voice. But her truth came out clear and undeniable. When they left the courtroom, the bailiff smiled and whispered, "You were the bravest one here, little lady." Emily looked at Kane. And for the first time, without whispering, she said aloud, "We did good, right?" Kane let out a soft bark. Everyone took that as a yes. After Emily's powerful pretrial testimony, everything changed. What was once a shaky case now stood on firm ground. The prosecutor, Gerald Burke, had watched countless witnesses come and go in his 2-decade legal career. He had never seen anything like Emily. Her connection to Kane, her laser-precise details, and her unwavering certainty had stunned the courtroom. But as powerful as her presence had been that day, the actual trial was fast approaching, and with it came a title. Wave of Pressure. At the Thompson home, the atmosphere was heavy with both hope and anxiety. Emily had spoken, yes, but testifying in the actual trial would be different. It wouldn't be in a side hearing with a sympathetic judge. It would be in front of a full jury, with both attorneys fighting hard, the press hanging on every word, and the accused watching her every move. That reality made Jenna and Mark uneasy. They didn't want their daughter traumatized again. And Emily, well, she hadn't said a word since they left court 2 days ago. She spent hours quietly drawing pictures of Kane, some of them with courtroom benches, others with strange red lines and boxes, all from her memory. It was her way of preparing, though no one understood it. At first, Officer Jake Harmon and Kane visited every day. "She's drawing a map," Jake observed, flipping through her stack of sketches. "That's the courtroom layout." "She's memorizing it." Jenna raised her eyebrows. "You think she's mentally rehearsing?" Jake nodded. "It's how she processes fear through preparation." Dr. Harper arrived with 2 psychologists specializing in courtroom trauma. They assessed Emily and agreed that her best chance of success was not through memorization, but through consistency. "She can't feel like this trial is different," Dr. Harper said. "Everything needs to feel exactly like the pretrial. Same clothes, same Kane, same rhythm. If we change too much, she could shut down again." So they recreated everything. Emily would wear the same pink dress, the one she chose herself. Kane would be outfitted with the same service vest. She would walk the same path into the courtroom. Even the lunch she'd eat before the trial, peanut butter sandwich and apple slices, was the same as during pre-trial day. The DA's office arranged a practice run. In an empty courtroom late one afternoon, Emily walked hand in paw with Kane as Judge Carlson observed from her bench. The moment Emily stepped up to the stand, something changed in her body. Her posture straightened. Her eyes focused. Kane lay beside her, calm and steady. Burke stepped into position and rehearsed his questions. Some of them were modified to match trial standards, but the rhythm remained familiar. Emily whispered to Kane, and Dr. Harper translated. "I was swinging on the swings. I saw a man come out of the bush. He had a scar. His shoe was broken." Each sentence, spoken softly to Kane, brought more confidence to her voice. It wasn't louder, but it was stronger. And even Judge Carlson nodded subtly with approval. "She's ready," she said later, "but only if no one breaks that rhythm." But the defense wasn't going to make it easy. Travis Greeley, the accused, had hired a new attorney, Raymond Locke. Known for aggressive cross-examinations, Locke had a reputation for breaking down even seasoned adult witnesses. He had argued that Emily's testimony should be inadmissible due to her dependency on an animal, claiming it undermined the credibility of the witness. Burke was furious. "It's not an emotional support chicken, it's a certified K-9 with field credentials." But Locke filed a motion anyway. A pretrial hearing was set to determine whether Kane could be present in the main courtroom. That hearing became tense quickly. Locke argued that Emily's reliance on Kane could manipulate the jury emotionally, making her seem more vulnerable and innocent than she might actually be. "This is a murder trial, not a therapy session," he spat Dr. Harper, composed and clear, countered with documented studies on child trauma, courtroom anxiety, and the success of K-9-supported testimony in difficult cases. "She is not being manipulated by the dog," Harper said. "The dog allows her to access what's already inside her. She's not reading lines. She's reliving a memory." Even Judge Carlson grew visibly frustrated with Locke. This court is not in the business of punishing a child for surviving trauma. She banged her gavel. Motion denied. Kane stays. Burke smiled. Jenna wiped away tears. And Emily, listening from outside the chamber, leaned down to hug Kane, as though she'd just won her biggest battle yet. As the trial date neared, Emily showed more signs of confidence. One evening, while sketching again, she handed her father a drawing. It was Kane, sitting beside a small girl on a tall wooden bench with a heart drawn above them. On the other side was a stick-figure man behind bars. Emily tapped the heart. "That's what justice looks like," she said softly. It was the first full sentence she had spoken to her parents since the day of the robbery. Mark choked back tears. "You're incredible, kiddo." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Kane rested his head on her lap, eyes closed, as if signaling that her job wasn't done yet, but they were ready. The night before the trial, the family tried to keep things calm. No news, no talk of court. Just Emily's favorite movie and a warm dinner. Kane lay by the fireplace, snoozing softly. Emily gave him a long, tight hug before bed. "Do you think they'll listen to me?" she asked him quietly. Kane let out a soft breath, like a sigh of comfort. Her father, standing at the door, overheard. "They'll listen, sweetheart, because you're telling the truth. And you're not alone." The next morning would mark the most important day of Emily's young life, and Kane's too. They weren't just walking into a courtroom. They were walking into history. A little girl, a silent dog, and a truth too powerful to ignore. The courthouse was unusually quiet that morning, as if everyone knew something significant was about to happen. The media vans lined the curb outside, their antennas pointed skyward. Inside, reporters whispered, lawyers shuffled papers, and every seat in the gallery filled. They weren't here just for a robbery case. They were here to witness the 7-year-old girl who spoke only to a police dog. 10:03 a.m. The doors opened, and a hush fell over the room. Emily walked in holding Kane's leash, her bear tucked under her arm. She wore the same pink dress, white tights, and black shoes she wore during the pretrial. Officer Harmon walked behind them, his expression solemn. Her parents followed from a distance, staying behind the scenes as agreed. Emily needed to feel as normal as possible. Her strength wasn't going to come from being anyone's daughter today. It was going to come from being Kane's partner. The jury took notice immediately. They'd heard rumors. They'd read the headlines, the whispering. Witness: child testifies through K-9. But seeing her small, fragile, walking steadily with the dog beside her was entirely different. Judge Carlson sat high at her bench, nodding to Emily. "Good morning, young lady. I'm glad to see you again." Emily gave a shy wave, then sat beside Kane, who curled up loyally at her feet. The sight alone softened even the most hardened court officers. Prosecutor Burke stood up. "Your Honor, the state calls Emily Thompson to the stand." Everyone watched. Not a soul spoke. The usual shuffle of feet or coughs or chair creaks was absent. The entire courtroom was listening, already invested, before a word was spoken. Burke approached slowly, careful not to tower over the small witness. He had rehearsed this moment for days, down to every word, every pause. "Hi, Emily," he said gently. "You remember me?" Emily nodded once, then looked at Kane. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Burke continued, keeping his voice calm and friendly. She looked at Kane, leaned in, and whispered. Dr. Harper, seated next to her as translator, leaned forward. "She says yes, but only if Kane's allowed to answer too." Laughter rippled softly across the courtroom. Even Judge Carlson cracked a smile. "That seems fair," she said. "Mr. Burke, proceed." The questioning began. Burke led her through basic questions: what day it was, what park she had gone to, who she was with. With every answer, Emily whispered into Kane's ear. Then Harper translated aloud. It created an unusual rhythm, but the impact was undeniable. "Emily, what did you see that day?" Burke asked. She whispered again. "She says a man came out of the bush. He had a green jacket, black hat, and a scar here." Harper touched her left cheek. Burke nodded. "Did you see where he went?" Another whisper. "She says he looked at her. His shoe made a slapping sound. He limped toward the parking lot." Burke walked over to the evidence table and held up the suspect's shoe, torn on the left sole. "Your Honor, this item was recovered at the scene." Emily described it before seeing this photo or item. Locke, a defense attorney, stood abruptly. "Objection. Hearsay. This child is being coached." Judge Carlson waved a finger. "She's not being coached, Mr. Locke. You've already lost that motion. Sit down." Burke continued, careful not to overwhelm her. "Emily, how do you know? The man in the courtroom is the same one?" She leaned closer to Kane and stroked his fur. Her lips moved slowly. Harper waited, then said, "She says because his eyes were scared. The same scared eyes that looked at her." It was quiet. Chillingly quiet. The defendant, Travis Greeley, shifted in his seat. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something, but he didn't respond. He just stared forward, visibly unsettled. Then came the moment no one expected. Burke paused, then held up a photo. "Emily, do you know what this is?" She stared at it, then whispered. "She says it's a candy wrapper. She saw it fall out of his pocket when he ran." Everyone stared. Burke turned to the evidence team. "We didn't catalog a candy wrapper, did we?" "No, sir," an officer replied. "But we can double-check photos at the scene." 10 minutes later, during a recess, they pulled up a close-up image of the bushes. Behind the leaves, barely visible, was a small red wrapper cherry twist. On the stand, Emily added, through Kane and Harper, "He stepped on it. That's how I remember it." Locke looked furious. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "We're treating a child's imagination as fact." But the judge slammed her gavel. "You may question the witness, but if you raise your voice again, you'll be held in contempt." Locke sneered and approached the stand. "Emily," he said coldly, "are you sure you didn't imagine all this? You were scared, weren't you?" Emily didn't answer. She stared at Kane. Then she leaned down, buried her face into his fur, and whispered. Harper blinked back tears as she translated. "She says?" She was scared, but not of the man. She was scared no one would believe her. The courtroom went completely silent. Even Locke stepped back. Burke took one final step toward the bench. Your Honor, the witness has clearly identified the suspect, matched multiple crime scene details, and demonstrated consistency across every testimony. We rest her direct examination. Judge Carlson nodded. Cross-examination will continue after lunch. As Emily and Kane exited the courtroom together, a reporter outside whispered, "That little girl just sank the whole defense." Inside, even the most skeptical jurors had their doubts removed. They didn't just hear her testimony, they felt it. A little girl had spoken with no anger, no vengeance, and no fear of the man who hurt their community. She had spoken only the truth because her dog had helped her unlock it. After lunch, the air in the courtroom shifted. The morning had belonged to the prosecution, but now it was time for the defense to fight back. Emily sat quietly at the witness stand. Kane nestled beside her, his head resting gently against her feet. The jury had returned, and Judge Carlson was back on the bench. The courtroom felt heavy, like everyone could sense the weight of what was coming. Defense attorney Raymond Locke stood and slowly walked toward the witness box. His voice was softer now, but still carried an edge. "Emily," he said, crouching slightly, "I know this is hard, but I need to ask you some questions. Can you help me?" Emily didn't look at him. She reached down and ran her fingers through Kane's fur, then leaned in and whispered. Dr. Harper waited, then translated. "She says she try." Locke turned to the jury and nodded, trying to appear patient, but behind his forced smile, he was desperate. The case was slipping through his fingers. If he didn't break her credibility now, the trial would be over. "Emily, you said the man had a scar, but how far away were you?" She whispered again. "Not far. Like from here to the judge's chair." Harper repeated it. Locke frowned. "That's a long way to remember a scar. And this was during a scary moment, right? Emily didn't move, she says. She didn't forget, because the scar made her feel cold inside." Some jurors shifted. The tension was growing. Locke pressed on. "And this jacket, how did you know it was green?" Emily hesitated, then whispered slowly. "She says because it looked like leaves. And when the wind blew, it moved like tree. Branches." There was a long pause. Her imagery was hauntingly precise. It wasn't just a jacket, it was a part of the memory, woven into how she saw the entire scene. Locke's frustration built. "Emily, people can make mistakes. Especially children. Maybe you saw someone else. Someone who just happened to be in the wrong place." Emily remained quiet for several seconds. Then she bent down and hugged Kane tightly. Her lips moved slowly. Harper's voice cracked as she spoke. She says, "She wishes it had been someone else, but it wasn't. It was him. Because she remembers." The way he looked at her, like he was hoping she hadn't seen. Locke stepped back. There was nothing left to push against. Every time he tried to twist her words, Emily's gentle, quiet truth shattered his attempt. Desperate now, he made one final gamble. "Emily," he said firmly, "do you know what happens to people when someone says the wrong thing in court?" Burke stood instantly. "Objection! Intimidation! Sustained!" barked Judge Carlson. "Mr. Locke, you're on very thin ice." Locke sighed and returned to his seat, defeated. The room remained silent as Emily sat with Kane, who gently licked her hand as if to say, "You did it." The jury watched the bond between them in awe. No one in that room doubted her anymore. Not even the judge. Later, during redirect, Burke returned to the stand. He didn't ask a single question. Instead, he looked at Emily and simply said, "You were very brave today." She looked up, then leaned into Kane again. "He helped me," she whispered. Dr. Harper smiled. "She says she wasn't brave alone. Kane made her strong." The jury's collective heart melted after Emily left the stand. Escorted by Harmon and her parents, she was brought into a private room where juice and cookies waited. She didn't smile right away. She just sat with Kane, resting her head against his. Jenna knelt beside her. "You were amazing, baby." Emily looked up, her eyes soft. "Do you think the truth is loud enough now?" Jenna wrapped her arms around her. "I think the truth is roaring." Outside the courtroom, news spread fast. The press dubbed it the whisper testimony, and Kane became an overnight symbol of courage and support for trauma survivors. Social media exploded with drawings of Emily and Kane, photos from sketch artists, and hashtags like #JusticeWithKane and #TheGirlWhoWhispered. But the courtroom still had one more moment left that would cement everything. The following morning, a forensic analyst was called to the stand. Under questioning, he confirmed new evidence: small traces of a red candy wrapper found embedded in the suspect's shoe tread matched the exact type Emily described. It was irrefutable. Burke rose slowly after that. "No further witnesses, Your Honor. The state rests." Locke had no rebuttal. That afternoon, the closing arguments were made. Burke spoke with quiet conviction. "This case isn't about spectacle," he told the jury. "It's about a little girl who remembered the truth when adults couldn't, who saw details no one else did, and who had the courage to say them through her best friend." He gestured to Kane, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the courtroom, still and noble. The dog didn't speak, but he helped the voice be heard. That voice was justice. Locke's closing was half-hearted, filled with legal jargon, and failed to make an emotional connection. Even he knew the outcome was inevitable. The judge sent the jury into deliberation. They returned in less than 4 hours as the courtroom reassembled. The tension returned, but this time it carried hope. The jury foreman stood. "On the charge of armed robbery, we find the defendant guilty." A gasp echoed through the courtroom. Emily, waiting in a side room with Kane, looked up when her mother received the message. "He's going to jail," Jenna whispered. "You did it." Emily didn't say a word. She just hugged Kane and whispered, "Good boy." That night, the lights of Brookridge seemed brighter. The people who had followed the case lined up outside the courthouse with flowers and cards. But Emily didn't want attention. She just wanted to sit in the backyard with Kane under the stars. As they lay on a blanket, she whispered again, "You helped me speak, even when I didn't think I could." Kane licked her cheek and placed a paw on her hand. In that moment, Emily didn't feel small or scared or broken. She felt heard. And that made all the difference. The trial was over, but for Emily, the journey was still unfolding. The day after the verdict, news crews packed up and reporters moved on to the next big story. Yet within the walls of the Thompson home, the impact of what had happened was still deeply alive. Emily had faced her fear, spoken her truth, and helped put a dangerous man behind bars. But healing doesn't happen in a single victory. It happens in quiet, steady moments afterward. Jenna watched her daughter sleep longer that morning. For the first time in weeks, Emily's face was relaxed. Her hands weren't curled into fists. No murmurs in her sleep. No tossing and turning. Just peace. Kane slept on the floor beside her, as he had every night since the trial began. He was more than a dog. Now he was family. By mid-morning, Dr. Harper visited for a follow-up session. Emily, once reserved and closed off, now greeted her with a soft hi, without needing Kane as an interpreter. Harper smiled, but said nothing, letting the moment speak for itself. They walked together in the backyard garden, where butterflies fluttered around wildflowers. Emily tugged gently on a leaf, then asked, "Do I have to go back to court?" Harper shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You've done your part. You helped more than anyone could have asked." Emily looked thoughtful. "What if I forget it all someday?" Harper knelt beside her. "That might be a good thing. Sometimes forgetting means your heart doesn't hurt so much anymore." Emily nodded, then smiled a little. "But I don't want to forget Kane." "You never will," Harper said. Word of Emily and Kane's testimony continued to ripple across the country. Law enforcement agencies began re-examining the use of support animals in courtrooms. Burke, the prosecutor, was invited to speak on national panels. But no one forgot who the real heroes were: the little girl who whispered and the dog who listened. Later that week, Officer Harmon called the Thompsons with news. "There's something I think you'll want to come see." They drove to the police training center, where Kane was stationed. When they arrived, Kane leaped into Emily's arms like they'd been apart for a year. She really laughed, and it was the sound her parents hadn't heard since before. "The robbery." Officer Harmon knelt beside her. "We've got something special to ask you." He held up a black and gold badge in a wooden frame. K-9 Officer Kane, official partner of Emily Thompson, for extraordinary service and justice and courage. Emily's eyes widened. "He got a badge?" "He earned it," Harmon said. "But that's not all." Jenna and Mark stood nearby as Harmon turned serious. "We've spoken with the department. Kane's nearing the end of his active service. He's got maybe a few months of light duty left. After that, we'd like to retire him." Emily's face fell. "He won't be a police dog anymore." "No," Harmon said. "But we want him to live somewhere safe, with someone who loves him." Her heart fluttered. "With me?" "If your family agrees," he said with a smile, "he's yours." Mark and Jenna exchanged looks and nodded before Emily even turned around. She let out a squeal of joy, hugging Kane so tightly, the big dog gently toppled over with a tail-wagging groan. She whispered in his ear, "You're coming home, forever." From that moment, Kane wasn't just her helper. He was her protector, her partner, and her peace. They did everything together: walks in the park, reading on the porch, even sleeping in the same bed. He never left her side. And slowly, with him there, her world began to open up again. She returned to school part-time a few weeks later. Her classmates, who had heard bits of the story from their parents or the news, didn't know what to say at first. But when Emily walked in with Kane at her side, kids gathered around like he was a superhero. One grave boy asked, "Is it true he helped you beat the bad guy?" Emily didn't say anything right away. Then she smiled and said, "He helped me find my voice." Her teacher, Mrs. Ellis, added a new rule to the classroom. Officer Kane is now an honorary class member. Each day, Kane sat under her desk while she learned, drew, and sometimes shared stories. Emily even stood up during story time and read aloud to the class, her voice soft but sure. At home, she began drawing again, not just sketches of Kane or the park that day, but beautiful pictures of other children with dogs beside them. In one, a crying boy stood on a witness stand with a golden retriever at his feet. In another, a little girl in a hospital bed had a beagle lying across her legs. When Jenna asked what they meant, Emily answered simply, "They're stories that need dogs too." Mark later sent those drawings to a national nonprofit focused on court advocacy for children. They were so moved that they asked permission to use Emily's artwork in their national campaign. Soon, her illustrations were featured in posters, flyers, and even courthouse waiting rooms across the country, offering comfort to other children who were about to testify. Though Emily had returned to a more normal routine, she never forgot what she'd done, and neither did the town. That spring, Brookridge hosted a community celebration in the Park Justice Day in honor of those who stand up for what's right. At the center of it all was a small wooden stage decorated with pink balloons and yellow flowers. Emily and Kane were called up by the mayor himself. This town was protected not just by our police force, the mayor said, but by a little girl who reminded us what courage looks like, and by a dog who didn't speak, but who heard everything. That mattered. The crowd stood and applauded as Emily accepted a certificate of recognition. But the moment she remembered most was when the mayor reached into a box and revealed a custom medal, which he bent down and placed gently around Kane's neck. The tag read, "Listener of Truth." Kane wagged his tail proudly. That night, under a glowing sunset, Emily and Kane sat at the edge of the park's pond. Birds chirped softly, and the breeze danced across the water. She leaned her head against his. "You helped me change the world," she whispered. Kane nudged her shoulder. And in that simple gesture, everything she'd done and everything she'd become felt real. The months that followed Emily's trial were quieter than the storm that had passed, but they were filled with growth, healing, and hope. The little girl who once spoke only in whispers, to a dog no less, had become a beacon of courage for her town and beyond. But Emily's journey wasn't just about justice being served. It was about how one small voice, heard in the most unexpected way, could change the course of many lives. After Kane officially retired from the police force and became Emily's full-time companion, the bond between them only deepened. Every morning, they would wake early to explore the neighborhood. People would stop and smile, knowing the story behind the gentle dog and the brave little girl walking side by side. But it wasn't just Emily and Kane who were changed forever. The police department of Brookridge, inspired by the trial's success, began a new program. They trained more K-9 units and handlers, not only for crime fighting, but specifically to support child witnesses and victims of trauma. They called it the Whisper Program, a tribute to Emily's quiet courage. Detective Morales, who had led the case from the beginning, became the program's director. She spoke at conferences nationwide, urging law enforcement agencies to rethink how they handled young, traumatized witnesses. "We often forget," she said in one speech, "that children don't always speak in words when they're scared. Sometimes they whisper, and sometimes all they need is a friend who listens." This story made national news. Emily and Kane were invited to Washington, D.C., where they met with lawmakers advocating for mental health and child protection reforms. In the justice system, Emily, shy but determined, sat quietly beside Kane during meetings, watching as her small voice inspired big change. At school, Emily blossomed. The trauma that had once silenced her no longer held power. She started a club for kids who loved animals, where they could share stories and learn about empathy and kindness. Her teachers reported that she was more confident and even started dreaming about being a veterinarian one day. One chilly autumn afternoon, as Emily sat on her porch petting Kane, her mother came out with a package. It was a letter from the court. With an official seal, Emily's eyes sparkled with curiosity as she opened it. Inside was an invitation. The Supreme Court of the United States had asked Emily and Kane to attend a special ceremony. They wanted to honor her bravery and highlight the importance of trauma-informed testimony in their ongoing efforts to make the legal system more humane for children. Jenna gasped, "Emily, this is amazing." Emily looked at Kane, then back at the letter. "We're going to Washington again." The day of the ceremony was crisp and clear. Reporters and dignitaries gathered in the grand hall of the Supreme Court. Emily walked in, holding Kane's leash, her steps steady and proud. Chief Justice Elena Martinez addressed the crowd. "Today, we recognize not just a case, but a cause. A cause made real by the courage of a little girl and her loyal dog." Their story reminds us that justice isn't only about laws and evidence. It's about listening, understanding, and giving voice to those who cannot always speak. Emily was awarded a special commendation, one of the youngest recipients in the court's history. When she received it, She whispered into Kane's ear. "We did good, didn't we?" Kane gave a soft bark, and Emily smiled. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Emily and Kane became local heroes, but to them, they were just best friends. Their story inspired books, school programs, and even a children's animated series starring a brave girl and her faithful dog who helped solve mysteries. Years later, as Emily grew older, she never forgot that whisper, the one that changed. A trial and a town. She kept a journal, writing about how fear can be overcome by trust, and how sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. On the wall of her childhood bedroom hung a framed photo of Kane, with his shiny listener of truth, metal gleaming in the light. Underneath, a quote Emily had written herself. "A whisper can change the world if someone listens." And that whisper, shared in the quiet company of a police dog, had indeed changed the world for Emily, for justice, and for every child who followed.